welcome all of you here. I'm Ekaterina from Future London Academy, and welcome to another episode of our leadership series. And our guest today is amazing, wonderful, fantastic Josh Higgins, who is currently VP Executive Creative Director for Atlassian. You probably know this incredibly huge tech company. And before that, he was Global Chief Creative Officer for Meta, where he was responsible for strategic creative development of Reality Labs family, including brands like Quest, Portal, Rebrand Stories. If you haven't got those glasses, they're quite amazing. I've been filming stories this whole summer through Rebrand. It's a lot of fun. And also, Josh, to be honest, he has so many different, or had so many different careers that I was just questioning before this call. How did he manage to fit all of this in one life? Because before joining all these incredible companies and growing and leading design teams across the world, Josh was design director for President Obama's campaign. And that's another incredible story in his life, where he essentially led the design and direction, including web, data and technology and everything else in Obama's team. And before that, Josh was a musician and played in a band and toured the world with some of the most well-known musicians. I really have a feeling we need like proper 8 hours to cover all of the things that you've done. But for now, just welcome, Josh. And how are you feeling today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. And thanks for that. That's a very nice introduction. And hopefully,
well, you all actually did this thing. So
thank you. I'm just happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you as well. And we received so many questions to you that we will cover throughout this conversation. But what I want to start with, something that I personally was very curious about, which is your work with Obama. I mean, it's very difficult to start anywhere else than with this pivotal point in your career. And you have lovely pictures hugging with Barack Obama, which is something that, it kind of shows how probably close you were throughout that relationship. So I wonder, what did you learn about leadership from working with someone who is probably at the very top as any leader can get, at least in this world?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll start off by saying he smells amazing. That hug, I took a big whiff as I was hugging him. I think the number one thing I learned is trust. And you have to trust your team and the people that you work with. He and his leadership, that was the key, I think, to them. They just really empowered the other folks to do their thing. I think when you hire correctly and you hire some of the best minds I got the privilege to work with, you can just trust. Obviously, there was a lot of strategic decisions that had to be made, and he trusted his team to make those and execute on them. And so I think that's what I learned most.
And when you say trust, how did it manifest, or what can you give an example when you noticed that specific trust in you or in your team?
I think what I expected was a lot of direction. And very, very specific, like a playbook of here are the things that I want you and your team to execute on. There was a roadmap of those things, but it didn't go beyond that. Then it was up to us to figure out the best way to execute, whether it was the website, whether it was the donation platform, whether it was, communications for the events. It was up to us to figure out how the best way to do that. And I think that's where the trust comes in.
And probably working with such a huge personality in general. And from what I've heard, he's very charismatic and he's very charming and he has a certain character to him. So when you work with someone there of that status and that personality, how do you find your own leadership space within that? Because you were still heading the team, you still were making decisions. So how did the balance of power work in that context?
I think, well, first it was, very intimidating. To say the least. I would say that, his interactions with the team were, it wasn't daily. And so, we would often get direction through his, people on his staff, and things. But when we were in his presence, you definitely felt it, not only for all the security measures that you had to go through just to be in the same room, but also to your point, his personality was so big. What was interesting is, the campaign, there was probably 800 people on the floor, so to speak. And when we would all gather to speak with him and hear from him, it was incredible how you felt the warmth from him. Even with the such a big crowd of people, you felt, at least I did, I felt like a warmth. And it was incredible that he was able to, when speaking to us, he was able to go from some very serious topics and eloquently flow into we were all in Chicago, where the best beer and pizza was in Chicago. Yeah, it was just really amazing to watch him speak and be in his presence.
Wow, I feel like you have so many stories probably from that time and so many interesting things that you noticed. I think one thing that always surprised me about Obama's campaign and in general that time in politics is the power of design. And I think that was the first time when kind of design was noticed as a tool of influence.
Yeah.
What did you learn about the value of design while you worked on that campaign?
Going through school and then early in my career, I'd always heard the term, design can change the world. And to be honest, it was something that was hard for me to sort of comprehend. I knew how it could do it in small ways, and in some maybe a bit larger ways. But that was when I truly saw how design can really change on a global scale. It really was hard for me to comprehend at the time as well. I remember, well, one, I didn't have a lot of time to think too deeply about it because we were just so entrenched in what we were doing. But upon reflection after the campaign, it was really incredible to sort of look at the body of work that the different teams executed and put out into the world that really helped shape like who he was and how people experienced who he was. And I think that was just when I really realized, wow, this design really has the power to influence and change the world.
And were there any particularly difficult design decisions that you had to make a bigger impact, or any good stories there?
Yeah, I think the one that comes to mind was he was such a different candidate at the time and still is. We really wanted to have him be represented differently as well. And after I was hired, I did extensive research into campaigns, all U.S. campaigns all the way back to the 50s and 60s, and just to see how graphic design influenced or played a role within those campaigns. And I think one of the obvious things was color. It was always the same blue, the same red. And I was like, okay, well, that is a place where we really can sort of mix it up and shake it up a bit. And so I remember spending, I don't know, at least a couple days with Pantone books and just like really going deep into color and thinking about different combinations, because I knew we weren't going to get away from red and blue, but how could we introduce a different hues that really signaled that he was a different candidate. And so one of the longest and probably most challenging conversations was getting the rest of the folks to accept a different blue and a different red. I know that sounds so trite and funny, but it was kind of a big deal at the time, to really, it was taking a risk. How would people see that, view that, accept it? And so I remember we had an advanced team that they are responsible for going out to the venues before Obama arrives there, and sometimes they go out a month in advance, and they get they see how they're going to set up the event and things like that, and they're also deal with news crews and things like that. And so we had to do a test just to see how that blue showed up on television. And so there was I would say, a week-long conversation back and forth about how the blue would show up on television and things like that. So that was probably one of the most drawn out and long decisions, was the blue. I think there was definitely many others, but that's the one that comes to mind.
I love this because I think it seems like the story of brand and subtle changes of color followed you through your career, because you were at Meta when Facebook went through the rebrand and became Meta, and also changed blue a little bit.
Yes.
So,
blue has been a big part of my life.
Yeah. Was that decision as long or even longer when you were at Meta as it was?
No, it definitely was not. I would say it was as challenging, but it wasn't as long. Yeah, we considered a bunch of different colors when thinking about the rebrand, but ultimately there was just, and just like in politics, there's so much equity within that color that from a brand standpoint, it was better to build on that rather than try and build equity into something new.
Yeah, the subtle differences that make a big impact. That's what design is all about. I
love it. It's the details.
Details, exactly. So we started talking about Meta and your journey there, and it seems like it was like a challenge on a completely different level. Can you tell a bit more about why did they hire you? Like, what do you think they saw in you that was very special and fit for the challenge that they had in mind? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I have thought about it quite a bit. I think at the time when I joined, or at least was speaking with them, Facebook/Meta did not have branded marketing per se at the time. They had a communications design team that sort of, they took on anything that wasn't like product design related. So everything from the corporate financial report all the way through the messenger logo. It was sort of like any sort of design project, but there wasn't. And a lot of the marketing was done with agency support, and those two teams weren't connected at all. And so I think what they saw in me is what I had built for Obama, and we're looking to build a similar team within Facebook that hadn't been there before. Shortly after I joined, we hired our first CMO. And I would say that was probably the turning point for the creativity and that came out of Meta at the time, because it really focused the company around how important brand is. Throughout the company, there was varied levels of what investment we needed to make in brand. Facebook at the time was, and still is, but was like growing rapidly. When I started there was 3,500 employees only. That was it. And, when I left, it was close to 100,000. So that was in 9 years. So you can just, the math, the growth is just enormous. And so, I think, they brought me on to really help codify and really focus the brand efforts there. And that was one of the first things I focused on was Facebook's first brand book. So, I was like, it's a 9-year-old company and we don't have these guidelines, and so it was a little bit chaotic, but I think anyone that works within a tech company knows the chaos that happens as you grow. And it's a little bit of the Wild West, but that's part of what makes it so exciting.
That's very interesting how you describe your journey there, because I think that's probably very similar to a lot of companies, or a lot of startups specifically, and product focused company, when it starts with a very much product focused design and everything is about product and everything is about digital. That brand is kind of put aside, is more of a functional thing that maybe is used for certain marketing activations. And then at some point it reaches critical mass when
Yes.
you actually have to think about it, which not necessarily I'm saying the right way to do it. I come from the brand side, so I would say brand should be there from the beginning, but that's
I'm with you. I'm with you there. I'm with you there.
But what's interesting, another thing that you mentioned, that another hire was a CMO, which is again something that is currently an industry, I suppose, standard, that there is a CMO and potentially a CCO, not always. Sometimes there is only a CMO. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the dynamic between CMO and CCO, and whether there should be one and not two?
There definitely should be two, for sure. I've worked in organizations, well, I mean, even at Facebook before the CMO was there, it's hard to have alignment between the different functions without someone overseeing that. And it's a bit hard to self-organize. And so the CMO, I really think, helps focus product marketing, brand marketing, and performance marketing. And so we're all, if all those functions are saying different things, it's obviously not great for the brand. And so I think a CMO at the highest level really helps to focus those efforts and make sure that everyone is, for lack of a better term, singing from the same song sheet, which really, the consistency of brand is so important, obviously, because it builds trust and confidence. And even the slightest variance within that are not great for the brand. And I think if you look at some of the best brands, you can see the consistency and why they are the best. And it's so hard to achieve in a big company. It's really hard.
Do you think there is a way where actually Chief Creative Officer take that role of overarching kind of person who looks after each touch point and each manifestation of a brand? Or you do feel like, basically, what do you feel like is the difference between a really strong CCO who can look at all these things versus separating this into two roles?
Well, I think the difference is, one is more business focused. The CMO is more business focused, and my role is more creatively focused in how bring those big business objectives to life creatively. I mean, I'm sure there's probably a good argument to having just one or the other. I personally, I think you need both. I have yet to see it work without both. So
I mean, I would love to see the different companies who approach it differently and see which one works, because I don't think there are many who pursue just Chief Creative Officer. So it's more of a speculation than potentially a solution. But there are many companies who just pursue getting a CMO without having a Chief Creative Officer. And that's actually not a very solid plan, in my opinion.
No, I agree. And I think it comes down to how much the company values creativity. And that is definitely something that, I would look to before I joined any company. Was my first, is what is their track record? How invested are they with creativity? And really having someone with a creative background and with a seat at the leadership table. Because oftentimes, there's some companies who feel that creativity is a service. It's sort of, you write a ticket, put it in, and you get something back. And that's definitely not someplace I would thrive in.
100% agree with you. And this is exactly the reason why we're having these conversations, because so far, Chief Creative Officers are a rare breed, but we do believe that designers and creatives should have more of a seat at a boardroom level and a C level, because they're the ones with imagination and with ideas that can benefit the entire company. When you joined Meta or Facebook at that point, as far as I understand, they did not have the Chief Creative Officer as a role at all. So you joined as an Executive Creative Director and progressed to this role. So, which means they literally created it for you. So can you tell a bit more about that journey and how to convince a company, or how did this conversation first of all come up? Did you say that, hey guys, we need a chief creative officer and maybe I'm the best person, or how did it all come about?
It was pretty organic, actually. How it transpired for me was when Mark hired a woman named Regina Dugan, who by the way, if our audience doesn't know who she is, please Google her after we're done. She's just an amazing leader, amazing woman. He hired her to think about what was next technology wise for Facebook/Meta. She also worked. She led DARPA for the U.S. government, which the technology arm of the U.S. government, and so her and I had worked under President Obama, and so we met and really hit it off and talked about our time. And so as she was building this team within Facebook called Building 8, it was sort of a very secret team of scientists and engineers sort of figuring out what was next. And she asked if I would be able to help her from time to time with different creative needs she had, because she didn't have a creative team. And I said, sure. And so I worked with her on the identity for Building 8, and she was really thoughtful about, like, what is the culture of my team? What is, how do we self-identify within this large organization? And she went right to branding, and like, we need to have like a team identity. And so I helped her with that. We worked with the experimental jet set in Amsterdam for that identity, and it's just beautiful work that they did. So one of her first ideas was for Portal, which was Facebook's video calling device, and so that was something that she took to Mark, and he greenlit and became a product. So all of a sudden there was a need to have a full go-to-market function for this product. And so she had asked if I wanted to lead that team and put that team together for her. So I I started putting that team together. A year later, I took over the same functions for Oculus and built out built out a team for that. And before I knew it, I had kind of worked myself into a CCO position, building all these creative functions from brand design, marketing, design, experiential, production, program management, business affairs. And so the team was getting quite large, and I talked to our CMO, and it was just really a natural thing that the role turned into by just building. And that, I think that was one of the beautiful things about working at Meta that I really enjoyed the most, was the opportunities. No one was telling you no. If you saw opportunity, if you went after it, usually it would happen. And so that was an opportunity that, I remember Regina telling me, hey, this may be nothing. This team might be disbanded within a year. So you sure you want to do this? And I remember thinking, I believed in her so much that I was like, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to take the chance. And, it really turned into one of the best parts of my career.
That sounds amazing. And obviously it seems like this was a great relationship between you two that really created a trusted partnership and benefited the company, benefited both of your creative adventures. So in terms of, I suppose, the practicality of it as well, was, again, creating a new role, even if it's needed, it's a big step. And especially when we talk about C-level, were there any other people that had to get involved to make a decision on that? Because it's one thing the design team says, you know what, we need a chief designer, we need a chief creative officer, we definitely need it, we believe we need it. And then another thing, the business and everyone else in the business saying, we do believe that we do need at a C-level. So what kind of conversations did you have with top management or anyone else outside of the creative side, and any tough questions you had to answer during that part?
I definitely had the conversation with our CMO, Rebecca Van Dyke. And so she and I discussed a lot, because there wasn't that as you had mentioned, there wasn't that position in the past. I think by the time that conversation was happening, myself and the team had demonstrated the impact that we could have in having someone in that position. Yeah, it was very natural how it happened, honestly. We definitely had conversations about it. I remember talking to her, and I had already been doing the role pretty much for the last year without the title. It definitely showed me there's no path to achieving these things. It's hard work. That's all there is to it. I've got asked that question so many times. So what is the secret? And the secret is hard work. That's it.
No way around it.
There's no way around it. You just have to put in the time and definitely the effort and be invested. I do believe that I've been very fortunate. I'm super grateful for the opportunities that I've been afforded. I do think in some way I've earned them as well because I put in the work.
One thing you mentioned, which I think is exactly what probably contributed to that conversation and the decision making at the end, is about the impact of design. And you mentioned how you already were showing the impact and the value of design. And that's something that, again, a lot of creatives sometimes forget by being too focused on the creative side and everything that we as creatives believe in, and thinking what actual impacts does this make for the business. So what kind of things, when you say it already proved they had an impact, what kind of things were you showing or sharing? What metrics, what numbers, what are the things that you felt were important to share with the business to show that what you're doing and your team is doing is actually having a big impact on business? When
you're working on, early days of Facebook, and it was harder to quantify that impact because Facebook is a free service. Obviously there's a lot of people on the platform, but it's hard to quantify whether like the marketing and branding that we were doing was contributing to that or not. It's a really hard thing to sort of measure. But once we started creating consumer products like Quest and Portal and Rebrand Stories, it's a little bit easier to measure that impact and what design does for those products. And so I think a big part of our job within the company was really demonstrating and helping educate those that hadn't worked with creatives as much, really like through the process of design, and really, back to referencing where we were talking about it just being a service, and really demonstrating why, like the thought that goes into even a brief, and how important that brief is for the designers to springboard from, or the creatives to springboard from. Because without that brief, it's sort of crap in, crap out. Without a great brief, it's just going to be like something that maybe looks nice but is not connected to the business goals. And so really demonstrating the strategic thinking that goes into the work that we do, I think was a big part of like demonstrating the value of design. And then I think obviously the sales, that was probably the best metric that everyone could see, was when, I'm thinking about Quest, for example. I first put Quest out. A lot of the sort of conversation on social media through people who were, big fans of Oculus, was about the new packaging. Everyone was like talking about the new packaging, or they were talking about, we really were focused on diversity of both thought with the creative, but also the output, and even all the way down to the casting of who was in the television commercials and things like that. I mean, diversity was thought of across the board. That was something that we, myself and the team were so passionate about, and having people comment on that and really taking notice, because Quest was first known as a gaming device. Virtual reality was thought of as just gaming. And so that audience, when the first Quest came out, having them notice in the advertising and the design the diversity was just really, I know it was a really special time for myself and the team, because something that we were so passionate about, people were actually seeing through our work. And so, back to, I think that was something that could be measured and seen. And I think that was really demonstrated the value of what we did.
I love how you talk about slightly different metrics that you look at. On one hand, it all comes down to sales. That's literally the goal of the business, to sell something. That's the definition of it. So it all comes down to revenue and metrics connected to revenue. But I also like how you talk about conversations of like how many people talked about packaging. So obviously, conversations mean awareness, means brand awareness, means just in general product awareness. So therefore, and it can be measured whether you're on Twitter, you can obviously look at hashtags or certain words and keywords and stuff like that will help you understand whether something that you put so many hours in didn't make a difference, or it kind of went unnoticed. Unnoticed not is always the worst thing. Specifically, if we talk about business goals, I think awareness is one of them.
It's a big, for a brand, especially a brand like Quest, who had very low brand awareness at the time. Virtual reality was something no one really understood or knew sort of the impact that it could have. And so part of our job was really helping people even know what virtual reality and Quest was. That was like one of the number one. And oftentimes that audience spoke about the experiences within the headset, which is totally makes sense, the different games, and but to have them talk about the packaging instead of the experience, that was pretty special.
And was that originally in the brief that you gave to your team, that it has to generate awareness, or did it happen organically, or what metrics did you have, if any, as part of the brief or packaging design to then go back and measure whether that project was successful?
I think it was definitely, I think the part of the brief was like create something. I remember specifically talking about, we want to create something that people don't want to throw away or recycle. That was probably the top goal. I think if, I don't know about you or your audience or the audience, but I still have like probably every Apple box of every product that I've ever purchased from Apple, and it's too hard to throw away because they're so beautiful. And so that was sort of the thinking was like, let's make something so beautiful that you don't want to throw it away or recycle it. And so I feel like we achieved that.
I love it, and I love how you phrase it as well, because I think it's part of exactly what creative leadership is all about, given the goal that on one hand has the emotional sense to it, that it is something that you care about, something you admire, and something that is this beautiful thing that you just, as a designer, as a creative, you're very proud of. On the other hand, it's something that serves a business purpose, which is awareness. Again, we can think of, if people don't throw something away, they probably think about the brand more often and all of these other things. And also they will probably share it with friends. If friends visit their houses, they might see it, and all of these things that are connected to that very much emotional part. I love how you phrase it. It's very beautiful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, to your point, I think it really, that's part of the brand building, is really creating an emotional connection to every touch point, whether it's a television ad, which is probably a little more obvious, but also the experience of walking into a store. Maybe you don't know about Quest, and you see that and you're attracted to it because of its beauty. Or if you are a Quest fan, you have it and it's something you're so proud of. And so, yeah, I think it's really important for any brand to really have that top of mind, is what is the emotional connection that your customer has with whatever touch point or surface it is.
That's a brilliant way to describe it. And we actually have comments in the chat about when we discussed whether it's chief marketing officer, chief creative officer, chief brand officer as an alternative. What do you think about that? Should there be a chief brand officer?
I think there is that role. I don't know if I've heard that exact title, but there is like global heads of brand. Oftentimes, it's probably that role is probably a little bit more, in my experience, been a little more business focused. When it comes down to even my current title at Atlassian, I think executive creative director, it's a very similar role to a chief creative officer. It's just called something different. So I think that's something that I've found as well, is depending on what organization you're a part of, even creative director, the term creative director is varied. And I think it really comes down to how the company is organized, but really making sure that what I look to is there creative leadership at the C-suite level. And is that something that is valued? If it's not, that's not somewhere that you'll find me.
I love that you describe these kind of different positions and job titles as kind of similar and depend on the context, because I feel like sometimes people get very much wrapped up in becoming a creative director or chief creative officer or whatever that role is, without necessarily understanding all the components for a specific company as well, because a chief creative officer in one company will be very different from another. And what surprised me about your story is obviously you've been chief creative officer and now you went to VP, which again, if we think of the hierarchy of titles, is potentially not necessarily a roll up, but as you're saying, it's exactly the same. But emotionally, I'm sure there was a thought that the next role has to have the C in it after being chief creative officer. Was it difficult to suddenly lose the C that people want so much in their title and go sideways?
No, it wasn't. I have to say that I did think about it for sure. I won't say I won't think about it, but at the end of the day, if you look at my career, the focus has never been around my title. My focus has always been, and what impact can I have? When I went to work for Obama, I was actually a partner at the agency I was at. And I can tell you that I would go in at 11 and leave at 4. It was a very cushy position. And I had worked so hard to that point that I was like, I need a little, like, this is a nice rest right now. And then when I was fortunate enough to have Obama's administration reach out to me, I had to leave. I had to consider, I left all that behind to do this. I took an enormous pay cut to go do that. I'm only stating that because I think it demonstrates, like, I've never been someone who chases a title, who chases, it's more around what impact I can have. And also what is the creative opportunity to really help move something, a business or an organization forward. And so with Atlassian, where I'm at now, they're very invested in creativity and having someone at an executive level who is championing creativity throughout the company. And that was my role at Meta as well, even though it was a different title. I think it's less about the title and more about, for me, the impact that can be made.
I love it. And definitely a great way to just navigate your life in general, not just career.
It makes it really easier. It makes it easy. If you're focused on that, I think you'll just, I mean, at least in my case, it makes me a lot more content and happy and feeling fulfilled, rather than, a title is not going to fulfill you. The impact that you have and what you create, that's what's fulfilling.
That's a great way to think about it, and definitely something that I totally agree with, and something that I wish someone told every single school kid when we're choosing our careers and jobs, that you should listen to what's inside you. Did you need to learn about business when you got to this position? How did you learn those things?
I honestly, I resisted it for a long time. And I think if it's your desire to really have an impact on a business like Meta or Atlassian, you have to be invested in what is, the companies are making huge investments in your team, not only from the folks that you hire, the agencies you work with, the media that they're purchasing, so your beautiful work can go out into the world. You have to take that really responsibly. When I was younger in my career, I didn't really understand that connection, and honestly, I didn't think about it a lot. Once you get into a position where you're leading teams and building, you have enormous budgets. You have to really start taking that into account, and you're held accountable for that money. And so if you're not thinking about how these decisions you're making affect the business and the overall health of that business, then you're not going to be successful in your role, for sure. So I think a lot of it I learned through working with the brilliant minds in marketing that I've been connected with, and really a lot of it's been through watching them work and paying attention. There's one thing to collaborate with the different marketing managers, but then there's another thing to really understand why they're making the decisions they're making, from strategy on media placements and media buys, all the way through to social media and in the places where we invest there. Much of what I learned for the business part of it has been learned through really paying attention to why the different decisions are made, and then how our work is connected to that.
Can you remember any specific example or number or decision that marketing team had to really explain to you? Maybe you disagreed, but it was a business-driven decision, and you had to really try to understand their point of view on that.
Yeah, I think one of the first was Facebook's first brand campaign that we did. It was the first time that the company had spent that much money. I think we worked with an amazing film director, which did not come cheaply. We bought tons of media. The company was really wanted to understand what this investment was going to yield. And so we had to work. We didn't have to. We worked with data science and others to develop a measurement plan to really track that. And there's something elusive about creativity. I think all the folks on this call can probably make a correlation between what we put out into the world and sales. But from a data standpoint, it's really hard to track. Because there's so many factors that come into play. So I don't think that anyone's really figured out the perfect way to measure. There's definitely different ways to measure. But I think one of the things is, we put some of the work through user testing, and what came back, the creatives were like, that's bullshit. And we're very, very against what they had heard. And it went against everything that we sort of knew instinctually. It was the first time that I was really surprised, because it was so opposite of what we had thought the work was going to achieve, what the data was coming back saying. And so we did make adjustments based on some of that. And I think that's another thing I'll say is our CMO, Rebecca Van Dyke at the time, the data people that are, our data team was giving suggestions into here's what you need to do. We were like, no way, we're not going to do that. And then, that's where a really great CMO can come in, she's someone who's just believed in creativity so much, and said, hey, let's take this information, let's see what makes sense for us to change. Instead of holistically changing everything, let's see what we can. And actually, I think it was a time where I really learned, okay, the value of this data. It's almost like coming up through school, I remember having so much feedback from peers and other folks. And I remember my professor saying, you need to take that, distill it into what you think is right and put it in there. You don't have to take it wholesale. And I think, at a very much larger scale, that's what we did is we took what we thought made sense, and we incorporated it into the work, and actually really changed the trajectory of that work to be much more impactful. And I think it was a one of those like aha moments for me, and I really related it back to when I was in design school and in receiving feedback on my work then, and really like trying to figure out like, how do I incorporate this? Do I have to take what everyone's saying and change this completely? But it was really, it's a really valuable, for me, it was a really valuable lesson to learn how to work with that input.
These are very wise words from your teacher, to take everyone's feedback and kind of dilute and digest it and get what you need to progress with your work and what you think is right for your next thing. And again, applies to everything, not just design. I feel like it applies to life. We can sometimes have so much noise and information in our world that it's very difficult to focus on what actually you trying to do here, what you believe in, what you should do. Definitely listen to people, definitely be open to other opinions and conversation. Doesn't mean that you need to take anyone's decision or side. You can always decide for yourself. Fake it until you make it. Agree or disagree?
Absolutely disagree. I just think you have to faking it doesn't do anybody any good. I think you really need to understand, like, no matter if it's design or anything else, you have to understand deeply about what you're doing, what the goal is. I think faking it only lasts for, it'll only get you so far, and then you're going to be exposed. So I think I disagree.
No, you just ruined everyone's imposter syndrome. What about those promotions we have to take and pretend we know what we are doing?
I don't know. Maybe I'm taking the question the wrong way. I think you just need to demonstrate impact and your ability instead of faking it.
Well, wise words. And when making important decisions, do you rely more on intuition or data?
I would say intuition. I think data is really important, but that intuition or gut feeling is something that I've always relied on in both creatively as well as my life.
Love it. All organizations should have a chief creative officer. Agree or disagree? Agree.
Again, back to doesn't matter really what the title is, but they should have someone with a seat at the table with the other leadership.
Price, quality, and speed. Prioritize 2 out of 3.
Quality and speed. At least in the environments that I've worked in tech, that is the key is quality and speed. I think when I first entered the field, I think it was around price and quality. I don't think speed was necessarily part of the conversation as it is today. I think that's a whole nother talk, though.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We live in a world full of fast decisions and fast things that we have to cope with. Going back to our previous question about CCOs and whether every company needs to have one, that some organizations are too small to have a CCO. What do you think about this, Josh?
I would agree with that. I think it's important for someone to be playing that role, even if they're playing dual roles. Oftentimes in startups, folks will play multiple roles. They'll be an engineer and the CTO. But I do think it's important to have someone that is playing that role within the company.
Great. We have the last question, which is hire for skills and culture will follow, or hire for culture fit and skills can be learned?
I would probably choose hire for culture. I think there has to be some level of skill, though, that, I think that's the first thing, at least when I'm hiring, that's the first thing that I look at is skill. But then once you get into the conversation, I think what separates the different candidates for me would be culture, and it's a bit of a loaded word, culture fit. I think it's more, can you see yourself basically having a relationship with this person that you probably spend more time with them than you do with your family, and so it's that's sort of how I look at it. But I understand what we mean by culture in this context.
Wonderful. And thanks for providing your perspective. I think it's Yeah, very interesting to hear your thoughts on each of them, because I don't think there is a unified kind of agreement about how these things should be done. And I think it's so important to hear different opinions and voices. And definitely that's something I question every time, whether skills are important or culture is more important, and how do you make those tough decisions, and whether you should look at the data or you should trust your own intuition. But I think that's what makes the beauty of this world, when nothing is 100% certain. And how did your career as a musician make you a better creative leader? What are your thoughts on that?
It's something I've thought about quite a bit. I think the early days, at least for me, the early days of playing in bands, I was always drawn to how do we get people to come see us and get people to our shows. And so even prior to knowing even what design was, I was making flyers and posters, and I was cutting up type, pasting it down, pasting pictures on top of that, and then taking it to a copy store and making multiple copies of it. And someone, later on told me, "Hey, that's design." I'm like, "It is?" But I was always very drawn to that, and really the promotional part and the business part of being in the band. I always seemed to play that role, no matter what band I was in at the time. So I think a lot of those experiences really helped sort of shape how I think about my, being a creative, and really helping to shift people's minds and be interested in enough to maybe look at that flyer and be interested to go see the band. I've always sort of connected those two things.
This is so wonderful. And I have to say, there are so many creative fields in terms of like music, cooking, and other fields that have exactly very similar facets of creativity, but we rarely are immersed in both of them. I think we might be passionate about certain things, but you had a great experience of being fully immersed in two very, very creative fields. So I'm sure your neurons in your brain connected in so many different ways that kind of benefited each of these fields nicely. We have questions from people. Wonderful. Valentina is asking, who or which function is your dupla or partner at work?
The brand team is my closest partner. I would say that it is, we're almost one team. I think in the best situations, the brand and creative teams are literally one team, but maybe are in two different parts of the company. But that is my closest and best partnership at both Atlassian and when I was at Meta.
Next question comes from Andrew from Slash. He's asking, how do you overcome the challenge of needing to scale, letting go of control, by not actually being the one behind the computer so that you can create growth within a smaller team?
Yeah, I think this goes back to where we started about the trust. I think you need to surround yourself or hire folks that you really can trust and let them do their thing. And be there for guidance and help them unblock any challenges that they're having, but really let them do what you hired them to do. I think when you try to immerse yourself and get really in the weeds with everything, there's no way that will work at scale. And so you have to hire people that you can trust to do what they do best, no matter whether that's a producer, program manager, creative. You have to hire people that you can trust, and you have to be okay with letting go of some of the things that you may have been used to overseeing. You have to really trust. I think that was one of the probably most challenging parts of moving up in my career, is letting go of certain aspects of it, and realizing that maybe what someone on your team created isn't exactly what you have done, but it was still a great solution. And so you have to trust and really invest in them.
That is a great answer. Emma is asking, when it comes to creating a thriving creative culture, what's one or two things you've tried that worked well?
I think one of the things is autonomy. I think it's a little bit different than trust, but really um, helping your teams feel invested in whatever it is that they're working on. That really helps to build a culture of I guess it helps to build the trust, but also psychological safety. I think that when we work in an environment where we feel safe to take risks, to maybe ask dumb questions that maybe you feel are dumb, but there might be 5 other people that have that same question. I think it's really, I think, creating an environment of psychological safety and where people feel empowered to take risks. Yeah, just be creative. That's one. I think the second one is, especially in tech, I think it's important to have outside perspective. So oftentimes when within Silicon Valley, you can really get immersed in thinking about what it is that you're working on. I think virtual reality is a great example. When you think about that technology day in and day out, every day, you start to think that, oh, this must be how everyone thinks about it. And then you go outside and you go to a conference and this is, I'll just tell you my experience. I remember going to a conference in South Carolina, and which is in the middle of the US, and realizing no one was talking about virtual reality or gave a shit about virtual reality. It really helps put things into perspective and really helps you reset how you're going to reach different audiences with your work. And so I think outside perspective is another great way to help build a culture of creativity and really help people understand that it's a big world and we really need to take in all the different inputs.
I love this point that you mentioned about getting outside and seeing different perspectives, because I think it's great advice for so many other points of creating a good culture, whether it's about inspiration and getting inspired by things that are not within your immediate team and products that you design, or whether it is talking to customers and hearing feedback firsthand and actually not relying on things that you assume people want to do with your product. All of these things, on one hand, they can be shocking and surprising. On the other hand, that's what provides you inspiration and actually drives you to do something
different.
Lovely. Jess from Webflow is asking, what was the most challenging aspect of leading smaller creative team to 100+ team?
One of the challenges is getting everyone invested in the vision, whatever, and that changes depending on the business context. But I think that was probably the hardest, one of the most challenging things, was getting everybody on the same page. When it's small, when there's a small team, people can have a tendency just to do their own thing, and that's okay, because there's so many things to tackle and do that can kind of work. But as you grow, you have to sort of get more focused. As you bring on more people and specialists for different areas and disciplines, you have to get more focused. And I think is creating a vision that rallies everyone to that focus was probably one of the more challenging parts.
We have a tricky question from Zoe. I have no C-suite creative leadership where I work. I'm the global creative director at group level. The company is a games company made up of many studios, all creating content. How can I help drive consistency across these studios and their content development when there is little support other than the brand team on site? Any thoughts of wisdom?
We had this early days of Facebook. What I would suggest is doing an audit and putting it all together visually so everyone can see the inconsistency. When I first started working at Facebook and wanting to put together a brand book, there was a lot of questions onto why that would be important. It wasn't obvious. I think to this audience, it's obvious, but at the time, the company was not sure why that was needed, and so I did an audit at all the different thumbs, or the team did a different audit of all the different thumbs that were being used across the product. It was 25 different variations of the thumb. And we put together, I remember putting that together in a slide. There were some gasps. People had no idea that was happening. And I found that was just a great way to show the visual inconsistency and why it's damaging to the brand. I think it's around, oftentimes it's around education. And I think that's part of all of our roles, whether you're, a junior designer all the way through, chief creative officer. I think part of our role is to help educate people on the value of consistency in design.
Love the practical steps. That's what is the best. Let's do this, and this is how you do it. Brilliant. And it's a hard. It sounds like a very linear process, but I can imagine there are so many.
It's very hard. It's very hard. Yeah, that I would say that process was like months and months and months. It's easy to sum it up in a few sentences, but it was months and months of work.
What do you wish you knew about this process that maybe Zoe, who will be going through this soon, should know before starting it?
You'll definitely encounter folks that even you're showing visually the inconsistency and maybe explaining why, they still won't understand why it's important. And that's okay. I think getting the right people to understand is the most important thing. But you'll definitely never have 100% agreement on the importance of it. And I think that was something in my career that was, I learned kind of late, actually, and maybe that was for the better. But I always thought that everyone had the same view on design and brand as I did. Like, of course it has to be great. I remember, talking to different folks throughout my career and realizing that, they could look at something that like I didn't feel was a great visual communication and something that was great visual communication side by side, and they did not see the difference. And it was both heartbreaking as well as enlightening for me to realize that there is just some folks that is just not how they're wired. And hopefully they will agree that and rely on your expertise when it comes to choosing a different path or a solution. But there is just folks that's not how they're wired. They don't see the difference in good or not good design.
Yeah, it's sometimes so hard when you know something to imagine someone who doesn't know it. We've all been there. I think that's what finance people see in us when they show us some, in my opinion, very complicated.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm looking at, but I'm sure you know. And they're like, this is simple. Yeah. Why does it seem complicated? But yeah.
Well, that's where trust comes in. Again, back to trust. That's where trust comes in. As much as we want folks to trust us, we also need to trust.
Very true. Very true. Eva Monte is asking how to present big ideas when you are not in the strategy level, but execution after briefing construction. I lead a team in Brazil for Meta, and we are constantly asked for big ideas, but the briefing arrives pretty close to us.
I'm not sure if this applies, but we would often do prototyping of the idea. Oftentimes a strategy document or even a simple visual representation doesn't do the job. And so we would often prototype the idea and demonstrate so someone could actually feel and interact with the idea. So I would say anything that can make it more tangible for the audience, I think is it's often a lot of extra work. But I think it usually pays off to prototype.
And is it prototype you feel like work because, again, they are potentially closer to the impact and linking what maybe design team is doing to potential impact it can make. So it helps the rest of the teams to understand
Exactly
business and link to other things that can change.
Sort of what we were just talking about, that people could visualize exactly what I was visualizing as I spoke about it. And that's not always true. And so a prototyping or getting closer to the real experience is often helpful in those situations, because it really has the light bulb go on for folks that are making the decisions. And they're like, oh, now I see what you're talking about. And oftentimes I'll, in my head, be thinking, how did you not see that? But okay. But that's where you have to employ empathy as well.
Empathy is such an important quality for any designer, but especially the more you go to the leadership, definitely something you have to rely on a lot. There is last question that I cannot not to ask because it's very special. From Matthew, speaking strictly from a design leadership point of view, what's your preferred dimensions for a skateboard deck?
Well, I think that has changed over the years. Now that I'm older, a longer skateboard is better for me. So I would probably say like 36 inches is 36 inches long and 9.5 inches wide.
Love it. And I feel like there could be another whole conversation about all the influences you had in your life, from music to skateboards, and your new book as well is all about that, which is really, really exciting. I have one last question left for you, Josh, that we love asking our incredible design leaders in the community, which is a bit philosophical. If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
If I could change equality in the world for everyone, I think that would be the number one thing. Yeah,
that's I would 100% agree with your answer. And I think that's something, especially having such a global community, we can all relate to. And I vote for your answer, Josh.
Awesome.
Are you considering political career anytime soon?
No, but I will help out any politician I can with creativity.
With creativity. Well, this was fantastic, and thank you so much for joining us and providing all your wisdom, Josh. Again, I feel like we could have another 8 hours talking about every single point that you mentioned, and we would learn so much more from everything you've done. So thank you for spending this 1.5 hours with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed my time, and thanks to everyone that tuned in and listened to me blab. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.